But I'd like to welcome you all to our second monthly meeting here for the Campaign for Liberty in Oakland County as part of the Michigan C4L group that's working in conjunction with the folks in the federal Campaign for Liberty. It's really exciting to see so many people coming out for our second meeting. We had a great first meeting. We have a wonderful team of people working together, patriots and activists who are motivated solely by doing the right thing. They want to defend liberty, promote liberty, and resist all the encroachments and attacks on our liberty by government at all levels. And so today, we will once again discuss some of the problems that are coming at us at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level, as Shane mentioned. And there are quite a few of them, actually. So that it would be, I think, very interesting. First, I'd like to mention that we do have a distinguished visitor here from our state legislature. I'd like to just introduce Tom McMillan, who's here, and Tom's a state rep from the register. And we're very pleased that he was able to join us. Part of my presentation will mention the legislation that we were able to get through the state legislature, and it's now awaiting signage.
Got to go through the Senate. The Senate, it's on the Senate floor. Okay,
it's on the Senate floor now. They get these various versions of it, so I think everything's got to be reconciled, and the wording has to be exactly the same, apparently. The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2012. This has many facets to it that we need to be concerned about. Next slide, please. So, we ask these very basic questions, and I should point out that this presentation was put together by the People Against the NDAA, or PANDA, which on the internet you can find at pandaunite.org. It's not a Campaign for Liberty presentation, but it does raise issues and questions and provide some ideas that are really critical if we want to defend our liberty. Next, please. All right. So what is the NDAA? What can and should you do about it is of course, a very important question. As we see on the next slide, the National Defense Authorization Act has been passed every year for now, I think it's 49 years by Congress, and it authorizes funding for our military and defense. And the slide says that's great. It is whenever it actually provides for defense, but of course, as Ron, Paul, and some others have pointed out, a lot of the funding goes for things other than actual defense. But nonetheless, that's the gist of it. However, in this version, hidden inside the 565-page bill, and 565 pages seems brief relatively compared to a lot of the things they pass in D.C. these days, but it has sections 1021 and 1022, and these are quite problematic. Because these two sections authorize the indefinite detention of American citizens without charge or trial. And as you can see here, it passed handily, overwhelmingly in the House, so there were some heroic people that voted against it, and 93-7 in the Senate, so there were 7 senatorial defenders of our rights there. But nonetheless, it passed overwhelmingly. And of course, a lot of the verbiage that was coming out at that time was, well, you got to do this, to support the troops, to defend the troops, and that sort of thing. And so there was a lot of misleading rhetoric that came from the other side, that came from the leaders of both political parties, that came from the White House, that came from the military-industrial complex, and the members of the 24/7 surveillance state. Yes. So, what is so bad about it? Well, it takes its authority, beginning with the 2001 Authorization to Use Military Force, or AUMF, which, as we know, was passed in response to the terrible events, the terrorist attacks on September 11th of 2001. Now, the AUMF did something which gave quite broad latitude to the administration, saying, next slide, please, wherever the president thinks he needs to take action, he may use what they say all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determines planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11th of 2001, or harbored such persons. Now, one of the things about this is it gives the president a lot of latitude to make those determinations. It also has some undefined comments in there like aided and that sort of thing, and harbored. But nonetheless, it did something interesting here where it targeted specifically groups that were involved in that activity. Next, please. Okay, so it set up a policy looking for retribution against those who committed those acts. And it was, of course, a very popular thing. Some suggested that perhaps letters of marque and reprisal, that was Thomas Jefferson's idea, might be used, but and there were some similarity to that here, only it was now using the United States military to do this, and it was very open-ended and quite broad in its scope. But it is retroactive, and it's tied solely to the attacks of September 11th, 2001. All right, so the targeting profile, and we're going to compare this to what's in the NDAA of 2012. The targeting profile was for anyone who had planned, authorized, committed, aided, or harbored of the terrorists that had perpetrated that horrible act. Now, the NDAA expands that authority. It does it in a number of ways. In Section 1021, subsection B, Clause 2, a person who was a part of or substantially supported al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or associated forces that engaged in hostilities against the United States or its coalition partners, including any person who has committed a belligerent act or has directly supported such hostilities in aid of such enemy forces. So that's the wording. What could possibly go wrong or be a problem there? And we'll see as we go forward here. Now, we compare the targeting. Again, only people who were involved in 9/11, but with the NDAA, at Section 1021, it includes people who were a part of or supported al-Qaeda, Taliban, or associated forces. It does not define associated forces. Many people have pointed out that the Taliban really wasn't involved in 9/11, though there was some controversy about maybe they had harbored bin Laden, that sort of thing. But associated forces, what exactly does that mean? And then it says that are engaged in hostilities against the United States or coalition partners, so other countries, who committed a belligerent act or directly supported hostilities in aid of al-Qaeda or the Taliban. Next, please. All right, now, this leads to several things. So it changes the national security policy by expanding the targeting profile, as we showed before, beyond 9/11 actors to people who were against coalition partners. The coalition partners, of course, change rather frequently. Libya and Gaddafi was supposed to be a coalition partner. Syria was supposed to be a coalition partner. Turkey's a coalition partner. They're having all those riots over there now. The coalition partners, often they change them faster than they change their alleged principles in Washington, D.C. We can't trust these people, and what right do they have to tell us that we can't, they call it a belligerent act, to speak out against the policy of a foreign government, much less speak out against the policy of our own government? Would they call that a belligerent act? They don't specify that. The time frame here is not just being people who were involved in these terrorist attacks. That's not involved here. But it goes from a policy of retribution directly in response to 9/11 to an ongoing policy which they call the war on terror. We have to be careful. They'll always use names that have certain emotive qualities to them, like the war on poverty, right? And so the war on terror, we're all against terror, we're all against poverty. Whatever the government does, they're going to make it a war on something that we don't like. But of course, these things frequently backfire. And of course, some people have said, gee, they ought to have a war on education and knowledge, because if they did that, there'd be a lot more of it. So we go to the next thing here. Okay, now, terrorism is an idea. It's not a very popular one. It's a bad one. It's been used by a lot of different organizations, and the names of some that have used it might seem rather ironic if we named all of them today. But it's the idea of using force against military force or non-state force against civilians to try to get them to put pressure on their leaders to change their policy. Okay? It's an idea. You can't legislate an idea out of existence. The possibility or probability of being injured or killed in a terrorist attack is statistically very low. Apparently it's lower than being struck by lightning twice. All right. So now, something very interesting and encouraging happened. A group of journalists got together. They were called the Freedom Seven. These journalists included some people who we haven't always thought of as being our allies in the fight for liberty, but they saw this as a very important thing, and they're to be commended. It included people like Noam Chomsky and Chris Hedges, Naomi Wolf, Tangerine Boland, and they actually sued in federal court, saying that this was so broad that they felt that they would be threatened as journalists from practicing their craft, getting information out to the American people. And how could the American people make decisions if they didn't know what was going on? And these people might be at risk of being arrested based on pursuing constitutionally protected activities. So, Judge Catherine Forrest, who was, by the way, an Obama appointee, said, as this trial went on, the government was unable to define precisely what direct or substantial support means. Thus, an individual could run the risk of substantially supporting or directly supporting an associated force without even being aware that he or she was doing so. Quoting Judge Forrest in the letters in red here, this measure has a chilling impact on First Amendment rights, or as we'd say, First Amendment protection of natural rights. Next, please. But this was wonderful that she said that. So, now, this law does not define its terms. It's very vague, which, by the way, violates everything that the founding generation said should happen with any laws we have in this country. And they wrote the Constitution so it could be read by those with an 8th grade education and understand what was going on. There was to be no vagary, no thing where you needed some rocket scientist or some black-robed magician. The average person is supposed to be able to read what they're doing and understand what's going on and be able to act with certainty and confidence that they will not be unjustly accused or imprisoned or killed by their government, which is supposed to work for us. But of course today everything's upside down and they think we work for them. Well, belligerent act was not defined. Associated forces were not defined. Substantially supported was not defined, and coalition partners are not defined in the NDAA. And somebody better warn Senator McCain, come to think of it, that we're talking about this. Oh boy, Lindsey Graham, somebody said. Now, oh boy, okay. Before we go off too far, but the NDAA authorizes the military to detain American citizens until the end of hostilities. Well, when's that going to be? If we're having a war on an idea, that'll never end, which may be their point. With a war on an idea that means indefinitely, no sunset provision. The entire destruction of the rights that are granted by the Creator and or just a part of our nature and protected by the very documents they put their hand on the Bible and swear to uphold is accomplished by this outrage right here.